Get down! Toran yelled, ducking behind the jagged rocks as the ground beneath him shuddered with the impact of the Vekler artillery. The air crackled with the deafening roar of explosions, the earth shaking as if the planet itself were screaming. His pulse hammered in his ears, each thud like a countdown to the next blast. The heavy sound of alien war machines echoed through the valley, their massive feet crushing the terrain with a primal fury. He could feel the vibrations through the soles of his boots, each tremor carrying the promise of death. Sweat dripped from his brow as he wiped it away, his fingers slick with the heat of battle. There was no time to rest. His only focus was the enemy, a hulking, scaled beast of a Vekler warrior standing a few dozen meters away, the creature's massive, clawed hands gripping a cannon that looked far too large for any human to lift. A spray of dust shot into the air as Toran rolled from behind the rock, his body moving instinctively. His hands gripped the edge of his rifle, finger tight on the trigger as he took aim at the Vekler's exposed flank. The air tasted like scorched metal and something more, the taste of war. The shot rang out, cutting through the dust. The Vekler staggered, the blast catching it in the shoulder, but it didn't fall. Instead, it snarled in anger, its beady eyes narrowing as it turned toward him with a guttural roar that shook the air around him. Toran didn't wait for the retaliation. His legs burned as he sprinted, diving behind the next cover, the sound of the creature's heavy steps pounding against the earth in pursuit. His mind raced. He had to outthink them. The Vekler were big, strong, and ruthless, but they weren't clever. They relied too much on their size, their brute force. Toran had seen their kind before, and their weaknesses were like open wounds waiting to be exploited. A faint beep in his earpiece signaled the presence of another enemy. Erixie this time, its cybernetic eyes gleaming through the trees. This was no ordinary enemy. It was a soldier designed for one thing: war. Toran's breath was shallow as he dropped to his knees, grabbing his plasma disruptor from its holster. It glowed with deadly purpose, its sleek body just waiting for the pull of the trigger. The Erixie warrior, larger than any human, moved like a shadow through the smoke, its glowing blue cybernetic eyes scanning for him. Toran could feel the heat coming off the machine, the whine of its energy core ringing in his ears. His fingers tightened on the weapon, his grip steadying despite the adrenaline flooding his bloodstream. "Come on," he muttered under his breath, his heart thudding in sync with the rapid-fire blips of his HUD, the heads-up display showing the Erixie's movements. Move. The second the machine passed the edge of the tree line, Toran's fingers moved without thought, the disruptor's plasma beam cutting through the air. It struck the Erixie's leg just above the knee. The cyborg dropped to the ground with a sickening screech, sparks flying as its leg twisted unnaturally. The machine's optical sensors blinked, recalibrating, but Toran was already on the move, darting through the thick underbrush. He couldn't afford to stay and fight them all. His focus was the Vekler, and the only way to survive this mess was to strike first, to cripple their will to fight. He knew from experience that an enemy that feared losing their leaders, feared not being able to command their forces, would turn on each other. The Erixie cyborg scrambled to its feet, but Toran was already far enough away. His boots thudded against the ground in rhythm with his racing heartbeat, each step a testament to survival. A rustling to his left. He didn't need to look. He knew what it was: Vekler reinforcements. He didn't care. His plan was already in motion. Toran ducked behind the next ridge, the heavy weight of his pulse rifle in his hands, feeling the cold metal against his fingertips. He breathed deeply, focusing on the terrain. The Vekler were too slow to catch up. They would be easy enough to deceive. He had prepared a series of diversionary devices ahead of time. He activated the remote detonator clipped to his belt, sending a silent signal through his visor's heads-up display. A muffled boom echoed in the distance as a massive explosion took out the Vekler's supply trucks, scattering their forces. The rumble of their frustration was nearly as loud as the explosion itself, their roars reaching his ears even from this distance. He could almost smell the anger, thick in the humid air. He smiled grimly. That was the start of his counteroffensive. A single human stuck behind enemy lines with no support had just crippled two opposing armies. They hadn't even seen him coming. In the distance, the sky began to darken as the night rolled in, and with it the stench of war seemed to grow. The smell of sweat, fire, and oil mixed with the thick, heavy air that would weigh down on anyone still breathing within range of the battlefield. But Toran wasn't afraid of the darkness. He thrived in it. There was no better time to strike. As he settled into the shadows, Toran quickly rechecked his rifle and the layout of his environment. The Vekler were not used to being outsmarted, and it would be only a matter of time before they launched a full offensive. That would play right into his hands. His head buzzed as he calculated the next steps. The odds were stacked against him, but he wasn't here to win in the traditional sense. He was here to break them. He would wear them down, make them question their assumptions about who was the predator and who was the prey. The sound of his breathing was steady, matching the pulse of his heartbeat. The hiss of the plasma disruptor was quiet in his ear, and the air was thick with the smell of burnt earth. There was no turning back now. This was just the beginning. Toran tightened his grip on the weapon, his breath slow and controlled. This war wasn't about brute strength, it was about outsmarting them. And in the end it was about making them realize that they had underestimated him. An ordinary human soldier stranded on an alien planet, caught in a conflict far larger than himself. And he would make them regret that mistake. Move, move, move. Toran's voice cut through the heavy air as he bolted between craggy boulders, the ground trembling beneath his feet from the Vekler artillery barrage. The distant boom of explosions shook the earth like a hammer smashing against the planet's bones, sending dust swirling in the air and choking the life out of the already suffocating atmosphere. His heart raced as adrenaline coursed through his veins. He had to keep his wits about him. Every second was a potential turning point. He wasn't just surviving anymore, now he was making them pay for underestimating him. He ducked behind a rock outcrop, his breath ragged but controlled, as he watched the Vekler war machines lumbering across the war-torn landscape. The heavy thud of their steps seemed to rattle the very ground. The rumble vibrated through his chest, every tremor a reminder of the danger creeping closer. But Toran wasn't worried. This chaos, this was his stage. And the actors, Vekler and Isi alike, were dancing to his tune. Through his heads-up display, he scanned the terrain. His eyes flicked over the incoming data from his small reconnaissance drone. The Erixi were beginning to regroup, but their strategy was clumsy. Their reliance on technology made them predictable, like clockwork that had been unwound too many times. The Erixi cyborgs were formidable on the battlefield, but they lacked the subtlety and adaptability needed to survive against guerrilla tactics. They thought they could crush a human under their metal boots. The Vekler, on the other hand, were pure power, their massive frames built for destruction. But brute force wasn't enough. They moved with animalistic instincts, charging into combat with little thought for strategy. They couldn't see the danger coming. Not yet. Gotcha, Toran muttered to himself as his laser plasma display flickered with new data. He keyed in the remote detonation sequence on his wrist comm. A soft click echoed in his ear as the system powered up, and he exhaled slowly. It was time to light the fuse. From his hiding spot, he saw the first Vekler troop carrier roll into view. The ground beneath it buckled with the weight of its armored chassis, and its engines roared like an ancient beast emerging from the dark. Toran's lips twitched into a grim smile. The humans might be the underdogs in this war, but they had something the Vekler didn't: the ability to think 2 steps ahead. He checked the readout again. The countdown on his display was running out of time. His heart skipped a beat. Then boom, a flash of light erupted to the left, where the Vekler convoy had just turned. The shockwave rattled through the air, sending debris flying and blinding flashes of orange and red blooming in every direction. The explosion sent a massive troop carrier toppling sideways, its hull crumpling like tin. The Vekler soldiers inside screamed as the vehicle caught fire. Their ranks faltered, and Toran could almost smell the confusion in the air, thick and heavy like burning metal. He didn't wait for them to recover. He was already on the move, blending into the shadows, his boots pounding the cracked ground as he sprinted toward the next phase. The Erixi were still trying to reorganize, but he wasn't interested in a direct fight. His war was a different kind, a battle of wits, and the battlefield stretched far beyond physical strength. His mind raced as he calculated his next move. His HUD flickered again. The Erixi were moving, trying to outflank him, But he had anticipated this. There was no honor in this war, there was only survival, and Toran wasn't about to play by their rules. He'd made them dance to his rhythm, and now he was ready to strike again. The next target was a heavily guarded supply depot, crucial for the Erixes war effort. It was located a few clicks to the north, nestled between the jagged cliffs that cut across the planet's surface. It was a tempting target, ripe for sabotage, and Toran knew that if he could destroy their supplies, he'd cripple their ability to fight. The winds picked up, whipping dust across his face. The planet's harsh environment did nothing to slow him down. His enhanced vision cut through the haze, picking out the Erixes' movement patterns. They were predictable, and Toran knew exactly where they'd be vulnerable. He moved quickly, slipping past the outer sentries, his heart thundering in his chest, but his mind clear. His target was the main control room. Destroy that, and the rest of the operation would collapse under its own weight. The Erixes had no backup. They relied too heavily on their technology to defend themselves. His fingers flew over the keypad of his wrist display as he inputted the access codes. With a low whine, the door slid open in front of him, revealing the control room bathed in the sterile light of 100 blinking consoles. A few Erixes soldiers patrolled the space, but Toran was already inside, moving like a ghost. He pressed himself against the wall, breathing shallowly, the heat of the room making the air feel thick and suffocating. Every step was calculated, every movement precise. He could almost hear the distant roar of the Vekler outside, the sound a constant reminder that he wasn't alone in this war. The vibrations in the floor beneath his feet reverberated through his spine as he made his way toward the central console. The Erixes soldiers were oblivious, too distracted by their own systems to notice the intruder in their midst. He let out a controlled breath and set the device. With a flick of his wrist, the plasma charges attached to the power cores of the control room hummed to life, ready to send a surge of destruction through the entire facility. Toran's heart pounded in his chest as he backed toward the door, scanning for any signs of discovery. The Erixes in the room still hadn't noticed him, their attention fixed on the various readouts. He couldn't let them realize the sabotage before it was too late. Suddenly, one of the soldiers turned. Toran held his breath, his pulse skipping as his eyes locked with the soldier. An instant too long. The Erixes soldier raised his weapon, but Toran was already moving. He was faster, and with a blur of motion, his plasma disruptor flashed, the shot cutting through the air and striking the soldier's chest. The Erixes soldier fell, but Toran didn't waste a second. He dashed for the exit, his boots skidding across the polished floor as the explosion rumbled behind him, sending the building into chaos. The Erixes would never recover from that. Outside, the chaos erupted. The Vekler troops stumbled into confusion, their lines fractured, their massive bodies scrambling as they tried to recover. The Erixes were in disarray, their communications severed, unable to coordinate a response. It was the perfect time to strike. Toran didn't stop to watch. He was already preparing for the next step. His role in this war was far from over, and he knew the battles ahead would be even more intense.
Keep moving.
They'll be on us in minutes. Toran's voice was low, controlled, but the urgency was unmistakable. The sky above was a sickly hue, thick with the remnants of the battle that raged all around. He could hear the far-off growls of the Vekler, their guttural roars echoing across the war-scarred plains, each sound a testament to the chaos unfolding in the wake of his sabotage. His boots crushed against the jagged rocks as he maneuvered through the terrain. The air was heavy with the smell of burnt earth and oil, thick with the sweat of desperation. His hands trembled slightly, but only from the heat, not fear. This wasn't his first time playing this game, but something about this planet, about the way the factions collided, felt different. The Erixes were intelligent, too precise for comfort, and the Vekler, relentless in their brute strength, now confused and cornered, were dangerous. Toran's job was to make sure they never realized just how vulnerable they truly were. He glanced down at his heads-up display, his fingers brushing across the sleek interface. The data was coming in fast. Both factions were scrambling, trying to adapt to the disruption he'd caused. A pulse of heat, from an explosion he'd set earlier, still lingered in the air, and Toran couldn't help but smile at the chaos it had caused. The Vekla had lost their way, their commanders were arguing, scrambling for control. The Erixi were no better off, with their sophisticated tech now turning against them, malfunctioning after his sabotage. "This isn't good," a voice muttered behind him. Toran turned just in time to see the shadow of one of his temporary allies, a rogue resistance fighter named Darnell, step out from the cover of the rocks. "Don't tell me you're starting to doubt now," Toran said with a faint smirk, his gaze still locked on the unfolding battlefield through his HUD. His hand hovered over a remote detonator, ready to set the next trap. Darnell's face was grim. "This isn't just sabotage anymore. It's war, and we're playing both sides against each other. If either of them catches on, we'll be buried under their fire." "They won't catch on," Toran replied coolly. "They're too focused on their own egos." He knew the Vekla were always at odds with the Erixi. One prided itself on physical prowess, the other on cold logic. If anything, they were already starting to turn their anger inward. All he had to do was keep feeding that fire. His fingers pressed into the display, and another series of data points flickered to life. His next target was a Vekla outpost, an unguarded hole in their front. If he could cripple their supply lines and force them into a retreat, it would give him the leverage he needed. "There's no time to waste," Toran said, glancing over at Darnell. The resistance fighter nodded, silently acknowledging their mission's urgency. The duo moved swiftly, keeping low and quiet, slipping between the wreckage of the battlefield, unnoticed by the aliens' fractured forces. The air was dense with tension as they approached the Vekla outpost, the sound of distant combat fading as they neared the heart of the enemy's camp. Toran could feel the vibration in the ground before he saw the movement ahead. The Vekla were on alert, their massive forms scuttling around like ants, scrambling to pick up the pieces of their failing campaign. He grinned. "Now," he muttered under his breath. With one swift movement, Toran tapped a sequence into his display, activating the carefully placed explosives in the outpost's fuel supplies. The ground trembled once more, this time with a more deliberate force. A deep rumble that sent the Vekla soldiers into panic. The explosion was devastating, a roar that split the air as it consumed the depot. Flames shot into the sky, turning the night into day for a fleeting moment, and Toran's ears rang with the sound of destruction. The Vekla were in chaos, and the Erixi, still recovering from their previous blows, were too distracted to capitalize. "They're scattering," Darnell said, voice barely above a whisper. "They'll be back in force, but not yet. Not while they think we're ghosts in the dark." Toran's eyes flicked to the distant horizon, where the faint outline of the Erixi's advanced war machines were beginning to appear. They weren't yet aware of the full scale of the damage. Their cybernetic enhanced soldiers, always so sure of their superiority, had no idea that they were walking straight into another trap. This was the perfect moment to strike the final blow, split their tension so far that they wouldn't know which way to turn. Toran wasn't done yet. He needed more time, more movement. With a quick swipe of his hand, he activated another set of explosives deep within the Erix's control centers, causing their already malfunctioning systems to descend into further disarray. His plan was unfolding like clockwork, each piece clicking into place at exactly the right time. In the distance, a strange hum vibrated through the ground, an incoming Vekla strike force, much larger than he'd expected. He narrowed his eyes and focused. There was no room for error. He would have to move quickly, plant false intel in the Erixi network, and ensure they were led to the wrong coordinates, pushing them further into Vekla territory.
Whoa.
"Time to get their attention," Toran muttered, and with that, he moved, his boots quiet against the rubble. He was already weaving between, using the chaos of the explosion to mask his movement. He'd been right about their overconfidence. Neither side was paying enough attention to him now. Both were too fixated on each other's growing vulnerabilities. He reached the nearest Erixi data tower and accessed the network,
his hands flying over the keys. The screen flickered in front of him, displaying a series of encrypted coordinates, all of them leading the NFC to the wrong places. He smirked, then disabled the entire comm system with a few quick taps. The ripple effect would send them into more confusion, and Beckler would capitalize on the opportunity. The more mistakes the factions made, the more Toran could drive them into the ground. Let's see if they can still see the end. With all this smoke in their eyes, he said, satisfied with the... Behind him, Darnell shifted, nervous. What happens when they catch up? They won't, Toran replied. Not before it's too late.
But even as he said it, the feeling in the air shifted. The first signs of realization were already beginning to form. Toran could feel it, a ripple of awareness beginning to spread through the enemy ranks. The Erexi would come after him soon, and the Vekler would do the same. He wasn't done yet. The plan had worked so far. But Toran knew that this was only the beginning. The real challenge lay ahead, and in the end it wasn't just about outwitting them. It was about proving that a single human could take down two of the galaxy's most powerful war factions. The ground beneath his boots seemed to shift again, the air thickening with the tension that he could practically taste. His hand twitched over his disruptor as the horizon darkened further. It wasn't just the planet's atmosphere that had thickened, it was the threat of what was coming next. Focus on the perimeter. Don't give them a chance to regroup. Toran barked as he crouched behind a jagged cliff, watching the enemy forces mill about. The last series of explosions he'd orchestrated had sent both the Vekler and the Erexi into a frenzy. The night air vibrated with tension as the wind swept across the barren land, carrying the acrid stench of burning fuel and scorched metal. The explosions had fractured their lines, each side scrambling to piece together the shattered remains of their plans. But Toran knew better than to underestimate them. Behind him, Darnell checked his plasma disruptor, his eyes narrowing. They won't stay disorganized for long. We need to hit them again, harder. Toran didn't turn from his post. His eyes flicked across his heads-up display, analyzing the map of the battlefield that lit up in neon green. A series of encrypted data feeds flowed across the screen, and he tightened his jaw as his plan clicked into place. He didn't need more destruction. He needed to lead both factions into the perfect trap. The more they fought each other, the easier it would be to dismantle their war efforts. They were getting sloppy, and that was exactly what he'd been waiting for. He exhaled slowly, every detail sharp in his mind. The ground around him buzzed with the residual energy of recent explosions. The Vekler, with their pride and arrogance, had already begun to regroup near the largest supply depot, unaware that their own movements were being mirrored by Erexi scouts. Toran's fingers danced across the laser plasma display embedded in his wrist, selecting his next move. The battlefield wasn't just a collection of bodies and machines, it was a chessboard, and he was moving the pieces. They'll move on the depot soon, Toran muttered, almost to himself. His eyes narrowed, and when they do, we'll make them regret it. Regret? Darnell echoed, raising an eyebrow. What are you thinking? Getting them to think they're winning, Toran said. Erexi will target the Vekler's supply lines. Once they're committed to the fight, we cut the power and lock them in. A sharp intake of breath came from Darnell, his fingers clenching the handle of his disruptor tighter. You're going to box them in, force them into a kill zone. Toran nodded, a slight smile tugging at his lips. It'll be beautiful. The Erexi had the technological edge, but they were too reliant on their machines. The Vekler were brute force, and in the heat of battle they didn't plan as well as they could have. They underestimated the importance of adaptability, and that was Toran's advantage. Darnell moved into position as Toran monitored the enemy movements. The first trap was set. The Erexi scouts were advancing on the supply depot, unaware that Toran had already triggered a series of false signals to draw them into the open. His finger hovered over the detonation button. The timing had to be perfect. The Erexi would need to push deeper into Vekler-controlled territory before Toran took action. If he was wrong, they would pull back, and the window of opportunity would close. Seconds ticked by, each one feeling like an eternity. The sounds of distant firefights echoed through the valley. The heat of battle swirled like a tangible force, making the air feel thick, suffocating. Toran's pulse was steady, He had been in this situation countless times, and his calmness was an edge in itself. "Ready?" Toran murmured, his voice barely above a whisper. "Ready?" Darnell replied. The moment had come. Toran slammed his fist into the detonation switch. The ground beneath their feet trembled as a massive explosion erupted from the direction of the Vekler supply depot. The night sky briefly illuminated with the blast, casting a harsh light on the chaos below. The Vekler roared in fury, their focus snapping to the newly destroyed depot. Their war machines lurched toward the epicenter of the blast, their massive engines kicking up dust as they raced to assess the damage. From his vantage point, Toran saw the Erexi forces begin to shift, moving toward the disarray in the Vekler ranks, eager to capitalize on the confusion. But that was when Toran struck. The Erexi were just stepping into the trap, and Toran had already sealed their fate. He tapped his wrist console again, activating the second wave of traps. Power to the Vekler and Erexi weapon systems were cut off, instantly throwing the battlefield into darkness. Their laser plasma weapons flickered and sputtered, leaving both sides scrambling to maintain control. Toran had ensured that neither faction could rely on their usual advantages. Now it was a battle of wills, not machines. They would have to fight in the dark, relying on instincts they hadn't honed in years. The chaos below intensified. Toran could feel the energy shift in the air, like the tension before a storm. He watched as the Vekler roared and pounded their fists against their war machines, but their movements were slower, less coordinated. The Erexi were more methodical, but their tactics were faltering. The lack of communication and firepower was stifling their strategies. They were vulnerable. Darnell's voice snapped him back to reality. The Vekler are about to breach the perimeter. Toran, should we initiate the final phase? Toran's eyes flicked over the terrain. The Vekler were moving in, but they weren't focused enough. Not yet. We let them get close. Then we hit them with everything we've got. The tension in Toran's chest tightened, but his grip on the situation remained firm. He watched as the Erexi and Vekler clashed in the distance, the sounds of their weapons now muffled by the smoke and dust clouding the battlefield. The once immense power of the war machines was now reduced to sputtering noise, their mechanical limbs jerking, unable to function without their core systems intact. As the final moments approached, Toran keyed in the command to release the third wave, an EMP pulse that would send both factions into a panic. The Erexi soldiers' advanced cybernetic enhancements malfunctioned, their systems short-circuiting, sending sparks flying from their limbs. The Vekler's heavy artillery weapons locked in place, frozen by the surge. Toran's plan was working. They were all stuck, trapped in his web. "This is it," Darnell whispered. Toran's gaze never left the scene before him. His finger hovered over the final command, but he didn't need to issue it just yet. He wanted them to realize their mistake first, to see the futility of their fight. His breath evened out, knowing what was coming next. The final strike was his. A moment later, he pressed the button. The EMP detonated across the battlefield, the shockwave sending a pulse of electricity through the air. Both factions, crippled by their reliance on technology, staggered. The ground beneath them seemed to vibrate with the hum of their failure. The battle had come to an end. Toran stood tall, the satisfaction of his plan sinking into his bones. Both the Vekler and the Erexi were broken. He hadn't just defeated them, he'd broken their spirits. And as they struggled in the dark, unable to understand the forces they faced, Toran knew that the galaxy would never look at humanity the same way again. The last echoes of battle faded as Toran stood at the edge of the ruined battlefield, the air thick with the stench of burnt machinery and the remnants of war. His eyes scanned the horizon, where both the Vekler and Erexi had been scattered, broken and defeated. The war machines they had once relied on, now nothing more than hulks of twisted metal, lay abandoned in the barren landscape. The planet, scarred by the violence, was eerily quiet for the first time in days. A soft crunch of gravel behind him signaled Darnell's approach. Toran didn't turn. There was no need to. He could feel the weight of the silence hanging between them. The resistance fighter had seen the carnage. They both had. "Is it over?" Darnell asked, his voice carrying the weight of the question. He was standing a few paces away, his hand resting on his disruptor, though there was no enemy left to fight. Toran didn't answer immediately. His thoughts were focused, his eyes scanning the remaining Vekler and Erexi forces that were left scrambling in the aftermath. The battle had been brutal, but Toran knew this was far from the end. The war didn't stop because the fighting had ceased. He stopped because their belief in victory had been shattered. That was his real weapon, depriving them of their confidence, their sense of invincibility. Yeah. Toran muttered, his tone low and steady. It's over for them. They're not going to stop, are they? Darnell said, his voice edged with frustration. We've taken down their leaders, torn their systems apart. But as long as they're breathing, they won't let go of this. Toran turned then, meeting Darnell's eyes with a calm intensity that could have been a storm beneath the surface. They won't. But it doesn't matter. We've shown them something they didn't expect. He paused, letting the weight of the moment sink in. That no matter how strong they are, no matter how much tech they've got, no matter how many war machines they can build, we'll still find a way to beat them. Darnell's brow furrowed. I'm not sure I follow you, Toran. What are you saying? Toran's lips curled into a slight smile, but there was no humor in it. Humans aren't like them. We're not born with claws, fangs or armor. We're not faster, stronger, or more powerful in the traditional sense, but we have something they don't. We've got adaptability. We think we survive. Darnell's gaze softened, but his voice carried a hint of disbelief. You really think that's enough? Just thinking and surviving? Toran took a deep breath, letting the words settle before responding. It's more than enough. It's all we've ever had, and all we ever needed. He turned to face the now dead battlefield once more. The dust had begun to settle, and in the distance the faint silhouette of the Erexi and Vekler troops could be seen retreating, licking their wounds. Both sides had been shattered by the sudden shift in their perception of power. They had underestimated him, and by extension, humanity, and now they would learn the true cost of that mistake. They'll never see it coming, Toran said softly. They'll go back to their home worlds, back to their borders, and they'll tell stories of what happened here. The prideful Vekler, and the cold calculating Erexi, and they'll talk about the human who broke their forces. They'll dismiss it as a fluke, as a one-time event, but the truth is, they'll never be able to understand it, and that will be their undoing. Darnell glanced toward the remaining leaders, those who hadn't been destroyed by Toran's traps, still reeling from the overwhelming blow to their confidence. Their gaze shifted between the destruction they had once considered their dominance, and the realization that they had failed. They'll go back to their home worlds, but they'll never forget this. Toran's voice turned into a low, gravelly tone, barely above a whisper. We've shown them that it doesn't matter how many soldiers they have, how much technology they wield. We only need one thing, the will to survive. Will to survive. Darnell repeated, his lips curling into a smirk. That's all you ever needed, huh? Toran turned to face him fully, locking eyes. The battle was far from over, but this part was. It's more than enough. It's the only thing that counts when everything else falls apart. A long silence passed between them, the weight of the planet's fate hanging in the air. The stars above seemed to flicker faintly, as if even they knew the galaxy was forever changed by what had just transpired. After a moment, Darnell let out a quiet laugh, shaking his head. Well, you sure know how to make a guy believe in something. Never thought I'd be standing here with a human who just made history. Toran didn't respond. He didn't need to. He turned away and began to walk, the crunch of his boots against the scorched earth the only sound in the still night. Darnell followed him, the sound of his footsteps distant at first, but soon they were side by side, walking through the shattered remains of the battlefield. You know, Toran, Darnell said after a few moments, his voice thoughtful, back on Earth, they've been talking about how we need to prove our show the galaxy that we belong, but after today, I think the galaxy just learned it doesn't stand a chance against us. Toran nodded, his gaze still fixed on the horizon. He didn't need to say anything. The truth was already in the air, hanging between them, like the smoke from the destroyed battlefield. We're the ones who survived, Toran said finally, his voice steady but heavy. That's what makes us different. That's why they'll never understand. As they continued walking through the wreckage, Toran knew one thing for sure.
The galaxy would remember this day, not for the technology or might of the alien factions, but for the sheer audacity of a human soldier who defied all expectations. The story of how a single human turned the tide of war, using nothing but his mind, his will and the relentless drive to survive. And somewhere in the distant future, when another war broke out in the stars, Toran knew that the thought of humanity would be enough to make every alien leader hesitate, to second-guess their plans. They would never underestimate humanity again. The future of the galaxy had just been redefined by one human,